are you guys?
Great.
With olive oil and seasonings. Yeah, and, roasted cauliflower and salad. And again, it's just sliced strawberries, and I bought a small package of cookies. So I baked a whole batch of cookies. I want to have that in my house.
I did my own Parmesan. They sell these Oreo cookies and chocolate chip cookies. They're about this big.
There was another.
And you know, she's right. They either put them on running your mouth or it's a rice over there. And it's just sweet. I started
I hope that in the next election, they can identify.
I got tired of it. And I thought, oh, I checked it today. And I thought, but I used to do it every day.
For voting session committees.
And then when Rich was.
Right, but not every committee is voting.
Yeah, I used to,
I actually put it on my protein.
There's nothing else.
Anything that I could think of that would help them up.
and I was thinking, a dietitian from, OH had recommended Fairlight's milk as one protein.
Yes.
So he liked chocolate pudding, so I was making chocolate pudding. I don't know how much chocolate pudding. I was thinking about it. Just to get something into it.
Morning, everybody. How's everybody?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Sure.
How's everybody? Think I'm okay. I hope so. I hope I'm part of the everybody.
I try, I don't have toxins. The munches.
See, I did my lunch. I was serving carrots and celery.
Good morning.
I don't like buying cucumbers, they don't last. But carrots, celery, peanuts, or not peanuts.
I can turn the head.
Good morning. How are you today?
And As far as
senior citizens. I'm telling you.
How are you guys?
Rabbi Klein, before you start, I want to ask you a question. And I'm sorry I've been meaning to write this week, but you've been a busy man. I heard last week you saying you were going to skip over to Leviticus 19. Are you going to touch about 18 or 20? You'll forgive me, is that too controversial for this group?
I'm going to do a little something on 18 and 20, but not much.
And if it was too controversial, I promise you, I understand.
I appreciate
just was curious.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Well, the other thing, politically incorrect or not, you are in a tough spot considering what's going on with the temple right now, so I salute you.
Thanks so much.
You have spoiled us, Rabbi. Rabbi, you have spoiled us. You have spoiled all of us.
Good morning, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. So good to see so many of you here this morning. It looks like we're growing a little bit in person, which is good. Thank you to those who are live streaming. We're glad to have you as well. I do hear from time to time from live streamers, question or concern, so this is good. We're all part of the conversation, some in person and some in person to themselves. Something like that. As I started down that sentence path, I didn't know how I was going to finish it. Okay, so who picked up bagels today? Oh, Bob, thank you so much. I think there are no sponsors for the bagels or the live streaming, but Bob, thanks for getting them. Okay, so blessing for the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We praise you, Lord our God, sovereign of the universe, who sanctifies us through God's commandments, enjoining upon us the obligation to immerse ourselves in words of Torah. Amen. Okay. I love this idea, which I talk about from time to time, la'asok b'divrei Torah, not to derive unqualified or dogmatic truths, not to get to some doctrinal essence of the Torah. I'm not sure that's possible, but to make Torah study our occupation, which is the main meaning of la'asok. And there are two ways of doing that. Let's call it overt and covert. We can make it our occupation by consciously talking about it, actually doing it in real time. We can also, in some covert way, make what we learn from the Torah a part of the fabric, the foundation of our lives. Even if we're not consciously aware of it at the moment, its values, its aspirations seep into our consciousness and animate the way we think about things. We're going to be looking at Leviticus 19 today, which does bring us several of those key ideas, imperatives, values. And as we walk through our days, we're not often aware of why we do what we do, why we make the choices we make. But I think when we make Torah our occupation, we are implicitly beginning to shape and reshape the foundation of our actions. And that is a way of doing it too. So let's look first at Leviticus 18. 18 and 20 deal with matters of sexuality. And I don't want to really get into that because it's complicated and more complicated than I understand myself. You know, so in order to deal with that, I would have to do some deeper thinking and sorting things out. And I know they're issues of the day, but let's not do them today. So, verse 24 of chapter 18. Do not defile yourselves in any of those ways, for it is by such that the nations that I'm casting out before you defile themselves. Okay? So, the issue here is defilement, which is a priestly Levitical understanding of doing the wrong thing. And what the text is saying here is that other nations who had lived in the land lost the foundation, the privilege of living there because they defiled themselves. The connection between behavior and legitimacy of living on a particular piece of property. Land and behavior. If we hold this place and just go back to Genesis chapter 15, and you don't have to go back there with me. So Genesis 15, verse 13, and he said to Avram, know well that your offspring shall be strangers in a land not theirs, and they shall be enslaved and oppressed 400 years, but I will execute judgment on the nation they shall serve, and in the end they shall go free with great wealth. Okay, so the prediction of the Egyptian exile. Verse 15, As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried at a ripe old age. And they shall return here in the 4th generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. That's the foundation of what we're reading in Leviticus 18. That the delay of hundreds of years, I suppose, has 2 rationales. One, you're going to go into slavery, there's going to be some suffering, I'm going to bring you out. So it lays the groundwork for the liberation from slavery. But also it underlines or lays the foundation for this idea that one can hold a legitimate place on the land as long as your behavior is moral, legitimate. And the reason why Abraham cannot and his people gain a holding in the land now is the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. It would be unjust to exile the Amorites from the land as long as they are acting morally. Okay? So that connection between that land and behavior is already intimated, expressed way back into Genesis. And now back to Leviticus 18, it's brought up to date, we might say. Don't defile yourselves in any of those ways, for it is by such that the nations that I'm casting out before you defiled themselves. Thus the land became defiled, and I called it to account for its iniquity, and the land spewed out its inhabitants, regurgitated its inhabitants. The land here personified as a kind of individual who acts as individuals sometimes do when they are ill, when they've caught a cold, when somehow bacteria has infected them. But you must keep my laws and my rules, and you must not do any of those abhorrent things, the things talked about in chapter 18. Neither the citizen nor the stranger who resides among you. All have the obligation to act morally. For all those abhorrent things were done by the people who were in the land before you, and the land became defiled. So let not the land spew you out for defiling as it spewed out the nation that came before you. All who do any of those abhorrent things, such persons shall be cut off from their people. You shall keep my charge, not to engage in any of the abhorrent practices that were carried on before you, and you shall not defile yourselves through them. I, the Lord, am your God. Okay? So, specifically, the laws and rules in chapter 18, and the same subject in chapter 20, if you do wrong by them, you will be spewed out. Now, one of the great medieval commentators, and this I learned from Robert Alter's commentary, Abraham ibn Ezra, who was a younger, maybe an older contemporary of Maimonides, said that this admonition now applies not just to 18, but also to 19. So that Ibn Ezra makes a connection between 18 and 19, or as if to say, it's not only laws of sexual practice, sexual morality and immorality that may lead you to be exiled from your land dramatically, but also applies to 19. Okay? So that is a kind of preface to what we're now going to be reading. We notice that chapter 19 contains ethical laws and ritual laws. Now, one of the foundations of classical Reform Judaism was a radical separation between ethical laws, or we might say the writings of the prophets, and ritual laws, the descendants, we might say, of these Levitical chapters, ritual. And early Reform Judaism, I think, made the assumption that ethical laws are eternal. They always apply. Ritual laws are time-bound. And even though they lasted for 2 millennia, when opportunity arose, when circumstances changed, we have to re-examine the applicability, the importance of the ritual laws. And one of the ideas here is that ritual laws can separate us, laws of kashrut. So laws of kashrut suggest that we can't eat with our Gentile neighbors. Now, when the Jews entered into a period that we call Enlightenment, the Jews were, to some significant degree and in different ways in different European countries, emancipated, no longer having to live enclosed in ghetto walls. And therefore, when we now had the opportunity to live among our neighbors, did it make sense, if we were going to try to make the case explicitly or implicitly, that we can be good Europeans, that we can be enlightened Jews? So when my neighbor invited me over for dinner, and I said no, and my neighbor asked me why not, I had a problem, didn't I? I could make something up. I'm not feeling good tonight. My husband is sick. Or I could say, you know, the laws of Judaism say I can't eat with you. Really? We are giving you the opportunity, and this notion of noblesse oblige, giving you the opportunity, was always a part of it. We are going to give you the opportunity now to have your religion and your people normalized, and in response, you have to show us that you can become like us. And if you didn't, then we might take it back. Okay? It was always contingent. So the ritual laws, in some significant way, separate one people from another. Children went to school in France, and in France at that time, I think, school took place on Saturday. Well, Jews don't write on Shabbat. But here comes a math test, and you're sitting among your 5th grade class, and the teacher says, everybody take out pencil and paper, and I'm going to give you a test. Yes, Billy, I can't write on Shabbat. But you're a member of this class. What are we supposed to do with you? Separate you with rules of your own? So the pressure on Billy is to write on Shabbat. Billy doesn't want to feel that he's excluded. And Billy goes home and he says to his parents, what am I supposed to do? And the parents also feel that they want to be a part of general society. And so they're under pressure, maybe not today, maybe not next week, maybe not a month from now, but certainly within the next several months, they're going to say to Billy, yes, you write on Shabbat. And we are altering the evaluation of the ethical laws, which always apply. Love your neighbor as yourself. But the ritual laws have to be diminished in importance, if not eliminated. And that was basically the platform of Reform Judaism in its earliest iteration. So Reform Judaism stood for the time-boundedness of ritual laws and the eternal bindingness of ethical laws. But a clear distinction was made between ritual and ethics. Now notice in Leviticus 19 they commingle with one another. Leviticus 19 knows no separation between the two. So that, what are we to make of this? I mean, one thing to make of it is classical, maybe biblical Judaism thought that all of this was really of one piece, eternally binding on the people to whom they applied. Okay? So no wonder that tradition-minded Jews, it's a little anachronistic to call the traditional Jews at the beginning of the 19th century Orthodox, because Orthodox applies to a modern form of Judaism. But it's no wonder that tradition-minded rabbis in the year 1800, 1790, 1800, thought that what Reformed Jews were doing was blasphemous. These are all eternally binding on the Jewish people. One famous rabbi said that one of the fundamental principles of Judaism is that there are no changes in Judaism. All of it is eternally binding. How do I know this? God gave them. And God said, obey them. The Torah doesn't say up to and including the French Revolution. So, and no changes in Judaism, it might seem deeply problematic because the rabbis made several changes. But the idea there is all changes are implicit in the original laws. And all we need to do, because in the Torah, Deuteronomy 13, I think it is, don't add or subtract anything. So what are the rabbis supposed to make of the fact that they're adding and they're subtracting? Oh, they understand it as just as the laws of nature are discovered at a certain time, but the foundation of those laws are always true. It's a matter not of new truths, but of the discovery of eternal truths. That's what science is. And that's what a rabbinic view of Judaism is. Biblical Judaism, rabbinic Judaism, is like the atom, atom. And if you hit it with a lot of energy, you liberate its energy. The energy is implicit in the atom. And all, now to use an analogy, the rabbis need to do is to bombard biblical text and liberate what has always been there. So change is forbidden in Judaism, and Reformed Jews were heretics. And I go on like this because Leviticus 19 does not know this issue at all. It's all of one piece. And so you can see how more tradition-minded Jews, though of course they're always making changes, but they say it's always implicit in the original stuff, plus or minus, can find Reformed Judaism to be deeply problematic. Sid?
So, question is, I guess, onefold. Let's take somebody who takes the traditional point of view, and it is Orthodox Jew, if you wish, and it's Shabbat.
Yeah.
And pick your enemy. Somebody attacks Israel. These are Orthodox Jews. Because it's Shabbat, are you telling me that they won't defend themselves because that's work? If I'm being too simplistic about it, okay. But it doesn't sound like it based on these items that you're reading.
So there is an answer to that, as it turns out, in chapter 18. So let's go back to the beginning of 18, verse 4. My rules alone you shall observe and faithfully follow my laws. I am the Lord your God. You shall keep my laws and my rules, by the pursuit of which a person shall live. And the rabbis say, infer from that, to live by them and not to die by them. So that we can't, when under threat, we can do something that, in quotes, violates the law, but in fact that violation is really a positive imperative. Classic example is a pregnant woman on Yom Kippur. She wants to fast, but the fetus is giving her problems, or she's deeply ill. And she says, no, I have to keep the fast. And so the doctor comes over and says, no, you're too sick, you have to eat. No, I can't violate the law. But the rabbis would say, you have to live by the laws and not die by them. And if your life is imperiled, not only may you violate, in quotes, the law, you must. So that if somebody comes and attacks me, I have the right, even the obligation, to defend myself. And now this becomes an issue. Under what circumstances and what laws and so on. The rabbis say that 610 of the 613 laws are under this rubric. I have to violate those laws if life is at stake. The big three, 11, 12, and 13, idolatry, adultery, murder. I may not engage in those activities even if my life is imperiled, because those are the fundamentals of Judaism. And this opens up the possibility of martyrdom, which Jews have done down through the ages. Very famously, what's his name? Rabbi Akiva, for example, I wasn't thinking of, I can't think of the, Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, I think is who it is, gladly went to his death when he was being forced to denounce Judaism, rather to die than to denounce what has given me life. Rabbi Akiva famously, when he is being martyred by the Romans, I think they burned him at the stake, and while his body is burning, he's reciting the Shema. And his disciples say, even to this extent? And his answer was, all my life I've said, with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. I've not known what the meaning of with all your soul is until this very moment. And now I have an opportunity to obey that commandment, that fidelity to God, saying the Shema, I cannot relinquish, even if my life is at stake. Now, Maimonides deals with the different circumstances and the different intensity of the imperative. I don't remember the details. There is the flexibility in the law when one is trying to distinguish various elements of a hierarchy. Okay? So, let's go to chapter 19. It's interesting, Sid, you raised a question for which the very chapter we were looking at has the answer, or at least it has the approach. Okay, Candy?
You mentioned adultery. How do they define adultery?
Yeah, well, that's a tough one. Adultery is, according to the rabbis, according to the Bible, I think, illicit sexual relations between a man and a married woman. I think it's the married woman whose violation becomes adultery. I don't think there's a symmetry there, but I'm saying that with 67% confidence. Okay, very good. So, the Lord spoke to Moses, chapter 19. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the whole Israelite community and say to them. So this is not just speak to the Israelites, speak to the whole community. So there is a pan-Israel application here. On everybody is it an incumbent to follow these laws. You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. So notice now that the notion of God's holiness becomes the exemplar of what we should try to be. And I always picture this as a continuum, from 0 to infinity, after all. God is infinite, let's just say it. We have to, life is taking the journey down that continuum from where we are toward God. Imitatio Dei, the imitation of God, becomes the standard by which one judges behavior. We're never going to get there. You may remember that Korah in Numbers chapter 16 or something, the cousin of Moses, made the mistake of saying not, we shall be holy, but we are holy. All the people are holy, is what Korah said. And so Korah didn't recognize the inevitable gap between God's status or position and ours. There's always going to be a gap between the standard itself and our attempt to climb toward it. Okay? So this is a theological understanding of the foundations of ethics. God as model. Okay. I'm laughing because I know there's a problem with this. Okay. Which is God's behavior is sometimes problematic in the Bible. Okay? With your permission, we're not going to take that on at this moment. Okay. All right. So, starting again. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the whole Israelite community and say to them, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. You shall each revere his mother and his father and keep my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. So, I want to read to you Rashi's understanding of this. This is one of two sections of Leviticus 19 for which the sages create a kind of narrative. Rashi makes a narrative out of this. The other narrative is to be found in verse 17. We'll get there eventually. Maybe not this year. You shall, 1917, you shall not hate your kinsfolk in your heart, reprove or chastise your kinsman, but incur no guilt because of him. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your countrymen. Love your fellow as yourself. I am the Lord. And you can see that, you can see the plausibility of making a narrative out of this. The path from hatred to love. Or to put it narratively, how do we move from hating my neighbor in my heart toward being able to love my neighbor? Okay? And these two mitzvot, don't hate, love, are mediated by the three mitzvot in between. Chastise your kinsman, don't take vengeance, don't bear a grudge. That's the path from hatred to love. And if we have time, we'll look at what how Maimonides summarizes these traditional laws. Here's what Rashi says about this. So where are we? Back in verse 3. You shall each revere his mother and his father. And by the way, let's go back just for a second to the Ten Commandments in Exodus 20. So, keeping this in mind again, let me just reread 19:3. You shall each revere his mother and his father. Exodus 20, verse 12. honor your mother and honor your father and mother. Anybody sense the differences between these two formulations of the same idea? Jim?
Well, to honor would be up here, and to revere would be, they're exalted.
Okay, very good. The difference between honor and fear. Okay, what's another difference? Anybody see it? Ellen?
They switched the mother and the father.
Good. The order. The Ten Commandments, honor your father and your mother, as if to say, first your father and then your mother. Whereas in Leviticus 19, each shall revere his mother and his father. So there are two ways of understanding this. One is, don't make a big deal out of this. Exodus 20 comes from one person, Leviticus 19 from somebody else, okay? Or two different schools. And you're about to spend too much time on the accidents of writing things down. The other approach is, God says nothing in vain. The Torah is a pan-intelligible text. Everything in the Torah is worth pursuing and trying to understand, because there are no mistakes, nor are there any superfluities in the Bible. Nothing is superfluous. When something is repeated, the repetition has a meaning. By the way, in this regard, I always think of Sigmund Freud, who said the same thing about slips of the tongue, about jokes, about dreams. Everything has meaning. And the task of psychoanalysis, of course, is to liberate, I might say, what has been repressed because it's too difficult for us to manage it, and bring it into the light of day. That which is hidden shall be made plain. And so in a certain way, Freud, who was not a religious Jew, but certainly acknowledged and honored his Judaism, mimics rabbinic modes of interpretation. And whether or not, scholars of Freud have tried to make the case that he read some Kabbalah, or he knew something about rabbinic rules of interpretation, and I think those views have been debunked. Freud just, maybe it was in his environment, his atmosphere, but the process is the same. Everything has meaning, and let's try to articulate it. The great difference is that this meaning comes from above, from revelation. Freud's comes from below, from our unconscious, our subconscious. But Freud, too, is dealing with the matter of revelation. We come to know what it is that animates our thoughts and our behaviors. And by coming to know, we are freed, which is the goal of psychoanalysis. Who is that guy at the University of Chicago? Wrote this great book on irony. Do you remember? Doris, what's his name? Who is both a philosopher and a psychoanalyst, and says the great goal of psychoanalysis is freedom, that we should be freed from those things that hold us up. Now I'm not going to be able to fall asleep tonight. Yeah, Jackie?
Yeah, I'll open a can of worms again. How can children revere a parent when they've been abused?
Okay,
Or are being abused?
good. That's a good question. Let's hold on to it, because we're going to look at what
I will.
Rashi says.
I'll hold on to it from May 2nd, 2020.
Did I? You're invoking, not meaning to, the name of a beloved participant in Torah Study for many years. She sat right there at the end of the table.
I remember.
Ruth Danziger. And you remember, those of you who were here at that point, that when I would say something, which she would say, you know what you said about this in 1992? And at first I said no. But it occurred to me that I should answer yes. If I say the same thing that I did 15 years ago, I'm being consistent. If I say something different, I'm growing. But he said this in 2020, right?
Well,
Me.
Well, I didn't write down the answer. But that is
Thank you.
something that has been bothering me.
Yeah.
Because we keep reading about
So we're going to take a look at what Rashi has to say about it and see if it helps us.
Okay.
Jordan?
Deuteronomy breaks the tie and says father first. And the same thing. But I remember in the past, people, rabbis, maybe you, have said that the Hebrew for this is not honor or revere, but fear.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. Well, I think it can be both, actually. Yirat Hashem is not just fearing God, but revering God, or to put God at the top of one's value system. The notion of reverence is the notion of separation. I know I can't sit in the chair of my Father. I know I can't come close to God. Part of reverence can be fear. Fear is a motivating factor. I think it means both, actually. Scott?
Okay, so maybe the Hebrew there negates what I'm about to say, but it seems to me that the honor implies obedience, which could occur without revering. You could just say, okay, I disagree with this, I don't like you, but I'm going to do what you wish. Whereas reverence is a more intense passion, a love, an endearment. So there's a different motivation there.
Right. Now, Scott's making an interesting point. I mean, the father, or the mother for that matter, could impose his or her will on the child. And when the child says, why should I do it? The answer is, who are you to ask? Don't ask. And the second has some kind of a process to it. And this relates to the function of the family. Are the parents the center of a power system? And using their power, especially when threatened, by stamping out the threat, okay? Some sort of abuse. And we know what happens down through the generations. The way a child grows up in a family is often the way the child behaves in his or her family when having the opportunity to be the parent. So I think Rashi is going to draw this out, that the family is not a matter of power imbalance, but the family is really an educational vehicle to help the children to grow. And I think Rashi's going to make this clear. Look, I mean, last night Rabbi Dadun, if I heard her right, said that kids should question their parents. Who could disagree with that on some level? But first of all, the parents have an obligation to direct the child in proper ways, and the parent can only do that if the parent is not questioned every step of the way. First of all, the parent needs to be revered, just as the teacher in some way needs to be revered. You can't learn from somebody that you don't respect. Okay? That doesn't mean that the teacher or the parent, or even God, I mean, Maimonides makes an analogy among 3 different relationships: parent, child, teacher, student, God, human being. All of them need to be revered for our sake, so that we can learn, so that we can gain something from the wisdom that is passed down from the generations. But as the child grows, as the student gains in knowledge and experience and insight, that person increases his or her right to challenge the teacher. After all, the teacher's main goal, the parent's main goal, is to raise an individual from dependency to independence. And you can't do that if you're constantly stamping down the child's views. And so as the child, as the student grows in experience and knowledge, that child, student, gains the right increasingly to challenge the parent, hopefully with respect. So if I got the gist of what Rabbi Dadun said last night, I found myself disagreeing with it because it did not acknowledge that first and foremost the parent has to be revered. Now, if the parent is brutal, that qualifies and maybe eliminates it. So let's take a little look at Rashi. So, now I thought about this at the last minute, so I didn't photocopy it for you, but let's see what we can do with it. So, comment on everybody shall fear his mother and his father, the first statement here. Here Scripture mentions the mother before the father because it is manifest to God that the child fears the father. Wait till your father comes home. That's the footnote in Rashi. No, it isn't. It is manifest to him that the child fears the father more than the mother, and therefore by mentioning the mother first, Scripture stresses the duty of fearing her. I prefer the word revere, acknowledging that fear can be a part of reverence, okay? So that it's suggesting, maybe we reject this, but I think in history, the father, more than the mother, is the one who punishes. I may be wrong about this. And so the biblical text reverses it, so the mother is revered as much as the natural one who is feared. In case of honoring one's parents, however, Scripture mentions the father before the mother because it's manifest to God that the child honors the mother more than the father because she endeavors to win him over by kindly words. I mean, look, I'm not suggesting we have to believe this all the way down the line, but it is an interesting way of trying to resolve the reversal. And what Rashi is up to here is that both parents are equal in terms of reverence and honor. Therefore, by mentioning the father first, Scripture emphasizes the duty of honoring him. Okay, so let's go back to the biblical text. Verse 3, you shall each revere his mother and his father, and keep my Sabbaths. I, the Lord, am your God. And so here's what Rashi says about, and keep my Sabbaths. Scripture places the commandment of observing the Sabbath immediately after that of fearing one's father in order to suggest the following. Although I warn you regarding the fear due to your father, yet if he bids you desecrate the Sabbath, do not listen to him. And the same is the case with any of the other commandments. It is evident in the meaning, since Scripture adds, I am the Lord your God, the last sentence of that verse. Here's Rashi, I'm the Lord your God in the plural. So in the Hebrew, I am the Ani Adonai Elohechem, plural, not Elohecha. Why is it plural? Both you and your father are equally bound to honor me. Do not therefore obey him if it results in making my words of no effect. What is implied by so a little bit of a narrative. First, we're starting with the obligation of the children toward the parents. then we come to recognize that both are commanded to observe the Sabbath, so that a mitzvah, if you're thinking of this as an ascent narrative from lower to higher, both are bound to observe the Sabbath, and certainly both are bound, Elohechem, plural, your God, to honor God. So that, yes, one should honor and revere one's parents, but there's something more important than that, and that is following God's commandments and honoring God. And if there's a conflict, one has the right to challenge or to disobey the parent. There's a famous example in the Middle Ages where the father on his deathbed says to his son, I am making you promise you'll never talk to Ploni Almoni again. Ploni Almoni is the Hebrew John Doe. You'll never talk to... Now, does the son have the obligation to obey his father here? And this is in the responsa literature. Somebody wrote to a rabbi and asked this question. And the rabbi's response was, he does not have an obligation. The parent does not have the obligation to bind his or her child to something that violates a commandment or a value of the Torah. Okay, so there are limits. Although initially one needs to honor one's father and mother. This does not abrogate that particular commandment. It's nicely dialectical, isn't it? The assumption here is that parents bring forward something of the wisdom of the ages, and therefore have the wherewithal to steer and direct their child. And if the parent does it well, the child learns and embraces some of the wisdom of the ages. And as one does so, one's critical capacity enlarges so that the child, the son or the daughter, can both become a person faithful to the commandments and building the foundation for being the father or mother of one's own child by embracing. That's the value, the role of tradition, isn't it? If it's brought forward, there's wisdom in it, but that doesn't mean everything in it is eternally true. But first obedience, then, so should I honor my parents? This is the dialectic of it. Yes and no, if you understand the narrative. Ron?
It seems to me that what we're talking about here is the diminishing power of because I said so.
Yeah.
As a child ages, as an adult grows, the because I said so diminishes. At what point do we grow to the level of we can say to God,
Yeah.
because I said so doesn't matter?
Absolutely. Well, there's no good answer to your question, at what point. But certainly at some point, one begins to have a right. There's that famous episode of the oven of Achnai, where there's a dispute among the rabbis. And that God decides to intercede in that dispute. Rabbi X says something, and the river runs backwards, which would seem to lend God's imprimatur on Rabbi X's view. Rabbi Y disagrees, and as the result, the river returns to its normal course. Okay? They go on with the dispute. In order to favor Rabbi X's opinion, the walls of the schoolhouse begin to fall down. Rabbi Y objects, and the walls of the schoolhouse stop falling down, and they remain like this to this day. Finally, there is a heavenly voice that comes out and says, the halakha agrees with Rabbi X, to which the rabbis say, essentially, stay out of it, God. You gave us the laws. It says in Deuteronomy chapter 30, I think, Lo b'shamayim hi, it is not in heaven. You gave it to us. Now we are in charge. So what are the rabbis doing here? They're resisting God. They're objecting to God's miracles don't count anymore. What counts is process in the light of day. And God didn't recognize that when God tried to solve the dispute by throwing a few miracles at the people. And they say to him, look, we're quoting you. It's no longer in heaven. So at what point did the rabbi, this is just to re-ask your question, have the right to do this? I don't know. But certainly one could ask, what are their qualifications? One of their qualifications is some sort of mastery of the textual tradition. They know, as we would not, what the right proof text is. Deuteronomy chapter 30. They also have a fundamental fidelity and faith in God. Because God gave the Torah and they are following God's word. Once again, the dialectic. Should they follow God's word? No, but yes, right? They resist God's interference by quoting God's text, to which they are faithful. So, I mean, it's a very good example of, think of Elie Wiesel, who was a Jew of faith in bringing God trial for the Holocaust. I mean, that challenging God is a big, I don't know if it's a major, but it's a big theme in the history of Judaism. Taking God on. How? In God's name. It's great. This is not the skeptical rejection of God. This is taking with great and deeper seriousness God's purposes. How do I know what they are? Well, they're not written down anywhere. These are God's purposes. We have to experience Judaism. We have to experience the text and come to a wisdom that is beyond knowledge. I mean, knowledge is gaining a purchase on the things that are known. Wisdom, isn't wisdom a kind of the development of some organic and not list-like of the way the world works and the way we should work? And I think there's wisdom here. There's courage. It's not Prometheus. It's Promethean. They are resisting God. But it's not Prometheus who violates the fundamental laws of nature, that human beings aren't to possess fire, that he steals fire from the gods. Now, the rabbis are Promethean in a certain way, but the difference is they're rebellious in the name of faith. Where the heck are we? Russell?
This is reconciled at the end of Job.
In what sense is that a problem?
God says, how can you question me? Just do what I say.
Right. So, as usual, I'm thinking about the issue of biblical theology. Is there an essence to biblical religion? Scholars have tried. You know, it's covenant, it's love. I think Job makes clear that the Bible has many different views on things. And you can't reduce it to some sort of monism. There's only one final essence. Like, I think it's fair to say, life itself. Anybody who thinks that life is about X and only X doesn't understand that life is about X and not X. Life is good and life is bad. And you better be willing to embrace both, otherwise you miss a fundamental part of reality. The question is, how do I order the good and the bad in my priority system? Is it good is first, and then I come to see bad, and bad prevails over the good, and I become a nihilist, and I value nothing? Or is it the other way around? I acknowledge the bad, but I yearn for the good, and that's my priority. So that without denying the problems of life, I still reach for joy. I mean, that's the question of the two of them. So Job has a particular answer to this question. Essentially, it's not knowable. You just have to finally come to recognize and acknowledge that I'm God and you're not. Who has a right to challenge me? That's what Job wants, I think, in chapter 13. I want a trial. And God says, no. Where were you when I created the woodhawk? When I created those crevices in the mountains where no human being shall ever walk? What makes you think that I made the universe for you and for you alone? The universe is not homeocentric. You're part of a larger system. And therefore, you're just going to have to acknowledge in that great speech out of the whirlwind when God says, you know, I made the world, you did not, and let's have some examples of that, is you're just going to have to acknowledge this. And Job does, and he gets all his goods back. The little tacking on of reward. Now, yeah, as opposed to Deuteronomy, which says we reap what we sow. If you act well, you get good stuff. And, you know, much of the writings, the third section of the Bible, resist Deuteronomy's view. Of course, as we looked at last year, or was it the year before, the whole Deuteronomic system, which contains, it's composed by 7 of the Bible's books, right? Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings. So Deuteronomy has enormous impact on biblical religion, and yet its basic thesis is resisted by many of the Psalms. I mean, a couple of the Psalms say out loud to God, wake up. Your devotees are suffering. Why are you sleeping? And you know, I mean, how blasphemous is that? God, who is always alert, always awake, never sleeps. That's not how it feels to us when we're suffering. So the Bible is many, many things, and I think Job is an extreme example. Job looks for rhyme and reason, and God says, my wisdom is not your wisdom, and you'll never know the whole thing. So get used to it. Let's go on here. Let's go on here. Let me go back to Rashi just for a minute. Because Rashi continues this narrative. You can see how brilliant Rashi's discussion is here. He builds a hierarchy. And therefore, the rights of the parents to elicit assent is strong but limited. Because the family is embraced in a larger system, kind of concentric circles. The children, the parents, values, God. Embrace the whole thing. And then Rashi asks, what is implied by the word mora, by the word fear, tira'u? Ish imo va'aviv tira, you shall revere your parents. What is implied by that word? That one should not sit in his father's seat, nor speak in his stead, nor contradict his words. So this is the idea of distance. I don't sit in my father's chair because I'm not on my father's level. If I revere my father, I recognize that he's got a higher status than I do, and that creates a separation. So that fear, reverence, is a stepping back. And what is implied by kavod? You shall honor, Exodus. What is implied by kavod, the word honor? That the child gives the parents to eat and drink, provides them with clothes and shoes, leads them into the room and out if they are infirm. So notice the difference, the fundamental, I might even call it the structural difference between reverence and honor. Reverence is stepping back, noticing the gap. Honor is stepping forward and helping one's parents, being ready to enrich their lives. Okay? So, and there are limits to both of those in the literature. You know, I mean, whose money do I have to use to help my parents? And the answer is your parents' money. Do I have an obligation to use my money? No, not if it impoverishes me. I think, once again, this is a matter of judgment. At what point does one do this? So, as usual, the rabbis are putting pressure on us to behave in a certain way, but they recognize the problems inherent in that pressure. Yes, step forward and do for your parents, but your own needs are also important. And that doesn't mean you have to sacrifice at the point at which you're sacrificing your well-being, at that point there begins a conflict between two imperatives. Support your parents, honor yourself. So let's go back here a little bit. So we're in Leviticus 19:4. Do not turn to idols or make molten gods for yourselves. I, the Lord, am your God. There's something a little binary here, and I think we'll see that binary aspect. Worship God. Among the things that you might worship God and not the other things. When you sacrifice an offering of well-being, this is the Zebach Shlamim, which is elaborated upon in chapter 3 of Leviticus. It's the third of the sacrifices. When you sacrifice an offer of well-being to the Lord, sacrifice it so that it may be accepted on your behalf, right? Do it the right way. It shall be eaten on the day you sacrifice it, or on the day following, but what is left by the third day must be consumed in fire. If it should be eaten on the third day, it is offensive and won't be acceptable. And he who eats of it shall bear his guilt, for he has profaned what is sacred to the Lord, that the person shall be cut off from his kin. Okay? So, a perfectly ancient law that has no application to us today. But it does illustrate in biblical terms, Levitical, priestly terms, another obligation. What does sacrifices have to do with honor your parents? I would say only that they're both commanded by God. They're totally different categories. Which difference the Bible doesn't acknowledge. That's, I think, a main point here, ritual and ethics. When you reap, now we're back to ethics, when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap all the way to the edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Those are two ways of taking from your field, in advance and after the fact. In advance, don't harvest to the corners. But don't go back after you've done the harvesting and pick up what has been left on the ground, before and after. You shall not pick your vineyard bare. Here's the before and after thing again. Or gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I, the Lord, am your God. Okay? So, Leviticus 25 makes the claim that God owns the land, we don't. We're custodians. And this, I think, is an illustration of that. I bought the land, I planted, I sweated every single day to bring this to harvest, and what I harvest is mine. I worked for it. No, it's not yours. You have the privilege of owning some land, which I, God, own. And therefore, you have to obey what I want. And one of them is to try to ameliorate the large gaps between the haves and the have-nots. The have-nots are also made in God's image. And therefore, the yield of the harvest belongs to everybody. You first, but do not forget, I'm not giving you a choice about this, don't take it all for yourself. And the idea here is, leave it so that the poor can come and take their share without your knowing who it is. That's not implied, that's not stated here, but it's implicit, certainly, in the developed laws of tzedakah in Judaism. And the conclusion of verse 10, I, the Lord, am your God. Who knows what that means? Maybe just God saying, remember, it's me. Or God is saying, I am the ultimate guarantor of these ethical principles. You shall not steal, you shall not deal deceitfully or falsely with one another. You shall not swear falsely by my name, profaning the name of your God. I am the Lord. Okay? So behavior, and certainly behavior in courts of law. Don't profane the name of your God, whatever that means. But one of the things it might mean is, don't bandy about with the name of God. Don't treat it as if it's just another word. Use it only in ways commensurate with the dignity, the power, the authority of God. Because if we just use it casually, what is being compromised? Not God's dignity, but God's reputation. After all, God can't come out of the clouds and say, hey, notice who I am. We carry the dignity of God. We who believe in God, we who take this seriously, are responsible by our behavior for the dignity and power of God. Somebody once said, look, if you lie in business and keep kosher, I'm not asking you not to lie in business. I would ask you that, but mostly I'm asking you not to keep kosher. Because if you're keeping kosher, implicit in that is that you honor God and that you represent what it means to believe in God, and then you lie in business. That hurts my reputation. It's as if following the laws don't have a deep impact on your life. We carry God's reputation. Don't keep kosher. Don't pretend you're a devout Jew. So that may be part, and it's a powerful idea, isn't it? That it's one of the reasons, just to be personal about it, I spell God's name G-D. I don't have a traditional view of God, but I feel I have a responsibility every time I use God's name and write it to recognize that this is the image, this is the vehicle of God's dignity. There is a God in the world, and I'm responsible for making that clear, not just to you, but to myself. And every time I write God's name, I think to myself, yes, that's what this is. It's a reminder to me. Patty?
3 really quick things. First, Jonathan Lear, so he can sleep tonight.
Jonathan Lear, good for you. Exactly. Professor of philosophy at the University of Chicago and a psychoanalyst. He's got a wonderful book on irony. If anybody is interested in the concept of irony, which I think is the main trope, Jonathan Lear, The Concept of Irony. I think he also has a book on the happiness of life. Major guy. Thank you. Thanks.
The other thing is Amazon is now pasting on the side of their delivery boxes
Oh, gosh.
How much it close to the.
That's
Yeah.
interesting.
And now it's just like so,
Right.
easily, I don't know how many people it affects.
That's
but
a-
I think about it when I see it, and I'm kind of.
It's an interesting
that way.
point. Becomes just another word, and therefore God just becomes another possible entity.
On a marketing platform. But the third thing I wanted to say was, in response to Jackie's concerns, because I feel the same way too. I was raised in a really dysfunctional family, and there's just no way there's any reverence on my part.
Yeah.
For one
And-
parent in particular. So.
And you turned out fairly well.
It's a miracle, right? But I think it also takes a lot of therapy. But my approach to any of these commandments, and in particular the ones that are just written out as rules, not really, it's easier for me to look at the narratives and kind of tease out the things that you can really use and learn from. But when you just have the rules set for it, they're optional. And that to me, even though they're commandments. But I'm going to look at them in the same way I look at the narrative and pull out everything that I can learn and use and apply in developing that wisdom. But I'm not gonna tie my life to that or think I'm a bad person ever because I
But
don't
as
do
an
those
adult,
things.
you can think that way. But what about a child? I'm talking about a child who is, it happens every day in this world. A child who has been or being abused, but then is told to honor and respect his parents. Now, how does he go about doing that?
Yeah.
Because he's beaten on one end, you have to honor and respect me, and on the other, he's being abused, whether it's physically or verbally.
Right, right. Oh, it's an abuse of the parental privilege, isn't it? And probably you're going to raise a damaged child unless the child is able to rise above it or to look for help. And the tragedy is, I don't want to be mechanical or deterministic about this, but the child is the more likely to be an abuser, him or herself, in his or her own family. So this is contagious, which is why it's certainly harmful and tragic for the child.
So what do you tell a child? That's my question. What do you tell a child when you counsel them
Yeah,
about this?
Yes.
These are children who are being abused.
you're right.
How do you deal with that?
No, it's an important question. I mean, the first thing you do is you embrace the child, you're empathetic, you try to let them know that you're here for them. And, but there's a tension here between doing an either or. Either you revere those parents or you don't. I mean, one has to find a way to see if the parental home is still viable for the child, under what kind of circumstances and what kind of help. So I don't know that there's an easy answer to it, but one can engage in the process of bringing comfort, understanding, empathy to the child, that the child has another place to go for support. Yeah.
Okay, so two things. One thing is, about just going back a little bit about the mother and the father in order of importance. As a child, when I learned about the 10 Commandments and it said, honor your mother and father, I never in my wildest dreams would have thought one was more important than the other. I looked at them as a family unit together. That's my one point. So this Rashi thing is a little too analytical for me. And the other point I wanted to make was what I got out of this is when it says love your fellow as yourself.
Uh-huh.
I sort of think of the old saying of do unto others as you would do to yourself. To me, that like sums it up. And respecting
Yeah.
others as you would want to be respected, and mother and your father, how you would want, as you become a mother and father, hope to be respected as you respected your mother and father, as it goes down, trickles down. Now, what happens if there's like a divorce in the family? I mean, do you honor your mother more than you, whatever. I don't want to get into it. That's a whole other ballgame, but I just
Right.
wanted to make those.
These are all things that depend upon circumstances. What we have here are some general principles, which we can embrace or not, which give us the language to deal with the complexities of particular situations. I don't think any of us would ever dare to say, in all cases, this is what we should do. But one can go into, I like the ethical theory of a relatively unknown British philosopher, W.D. Ross, who was also an Aristotelian, wrote a great book on Aristotle, who made a distinction between what he called prima facie values and total values. Prima facie values are like, you have a little card in your pocket, and on it are certain things that you value. Don't steal, don't lie, on and so on. But these are prima facie. They're not automatically to be invoked and obeyed. These are the kinds of materials one walks through life with, and depending upon the situation, one value is brought to prominence or another is brought to prominence. I mean, we might say on my 3x5 card, I wish I had one now, don't steal. Okay, is this an absolute? I mean, Aristotle makes the point himself that a hungry person has a right to do some stealing. I don't know if he says it that absolutely. But what are the absolutes? Honor your father, revere your mother. Are these absolutes or are they prima facie? Meaning, initially, these are things that I should pay attention to, and they become deployed only in and through the complexities of particular situations. It's a non-Kantian view. Kant talks about absolute imperatives, categorical imperatives, never lie, never say. That's nice and clean, but it's unrealistic. I think Ross's view of particular things we hold dear, none of which are ever automatically or mechanically applied because situations create differences. Ron?
Except I am reading this as an adult.
Okay.
It's unspoken but imperative that I communicate this to my younger generations, my children. That I teach them what these rules are, these commandments are. At the risk of being called a pontilist, at what point do I sit down with my kid and say, respect me, you're supposed to do that. Honor me, you're supposed to do that. When is the child to be taught this? And my response to my question is that this is a commandment upon me to conduct myself in such a way that my child will honor me, will respect me. This doesn't exactly say that.
Think of the narrative here, and we've only talked about one way of looking at the narrative. Let's suppose there are three values here, three ideas. What Rashi's narrative is to treat them in numerical order. 1, then 2, then 3, honor God. But one can also do the converse, that if I am living a life in a certain way, the parent, because that's number 2 or number 3, that is likely to lead to number 1, to honor your parents. So I think you've got a good intuition here, that one can see this both as the order of value, but it also can be seen, that's 1, 2, 3, the child, the parent, God, but it also can be seen 3, 2, 1. The order in which it is enacted. So 1, 2, 3 is logical order. 3, 2, 1 is temporal order.
If I honor God.
Honor God.
Then the others follow automatically.
Be an honorable parent. Your child will honor you. So I think you put your finger on something really great. I mean, one doesn't have to label these two processes logical, temporal. One can relate them as, I don't know, what the values are and how to implement these values. What's the way? I might say, if I only stick to logical order, pound into the head of your child to honor me. That's clearly doesn't work. The way it does work is 3, 2, 1. You know, I never thought of that before. You helped me see that. Yeah. Vivian, then we have to stop.
Okay.
Yeah, go.
This may be a more simplistic way of looking at verse 3, but it seems to me, it argues for the strength of family. You pulled out your card, and on your card is your name. And why do we name our children after our most revered relatives? Honor the name of your family.
Yeah.
Revere your parents. They have given you life. And to me, that is arguing for the peace and security and future of a family. And you read enough memoirs of abused children, and they have been given life, and from that they have learned. You can learn from an abusive parent, or you can learn from difficult circumstances in a family. But it is the basis of life.
Yeah. So Vivian is saying here the centrality of the family and how that creates culture and but you know, I think about games. Let's use the word game seriously and not just some frivolous activity. There are rules to a game. There's the purpose of a game. We know how to play the game. The game can be played well and it can be played badly, right? If I'm playing shortstop and I've got 7 errors out of 8 chances, I'm not playing the game of shortstop very well. And let's just apply this, if you'll allow me to say it this way, the game of being a family. There are ways to do it. There are players. There are goals. But the game can be played badly. If the parents, if the children, if the players haven't learned how to turn the double play. Unless you know how to do that, you don't call yourself a shortstop. If you're not an honorable parent, you aren't playing the game of family well. And there are consequences to that. And one might be increased disobedience, not honoring, and in terms of Ron's 3, 2, 1, the parents deserve that if they're not playing the game well. What's a family for? It's not to sustain the power of the parent, it's to create in the parent a desire to pass on the values of a family and of a society. And if they see themselves as little power sources in their own family, they're not turning the family double play very well. Okay, we will continue next week. Shabbat Shalom. I'm sorry, Charlotte. I'm going to have to run, so.
Moses Mendelssohn was a Jewish philosopher who refused to eat dinner with friends who were not Jewish because they wouldn't keep kosher. His son, when he
He wouldn't what?
Would he eat at his son's home?
He wouldn't eat. Mendelssohn wouldn't eat in his son's home. Is that what you're saying?
Question.
Oh. Yeah, a dilemma. I would say, they probably tried to find a compromise. Paper plates, I don't know. But I'll bet if it was just what the son was willing to do, and as we know, all of Mendelssohn's grandchildren converted to Christianity. So Mendelssohn was a halachic Jew.
Right.
I mean, he did try to make concessions. In a way, he's a modernist with qualifications.
But he would not eat grape.
Okay. And he didn't win that argument, did he? Because within 2 generations, he was gone in his family. Yeah. That doesn't mean they're dishonorable. It just means they didn't hold on to the traditions under the pressure of assimilation. Thank God for Felix Mendelssohn. And Sophie. Is that his sister's name? Yeah. She died suddenly early, and he died a few months later.
Yeah.
I just want to say,
another great genius,
when the
premature.
Orthodox aren't living in the 21st century, but they do.
They do what?
They do try on the synagogue on Cedar. That's so good. They have a woman president.
Okay.
Arlene Smith. When Arlene Smith became president of that synagogue, everyone rejoiced.
Well, they're modern Orthodox, aren't they? So they're trying to they live on the boundary the way the Syriac Orthodox don't.
That's what's coming.
Yeah, but the Orthodox, the right-wing Orthodox are also thriving, aren't they? They're producing many more children, both here and in Israel. Their communities are vibrant. In a way, they're winning the battle, though at a cost. They have to isolate themselves from general society. They don't see it as a cause.
No.
Thomas.
I don't have more.
Oh, what's the stuff on time?
I thought you were laughing. No, I have one this afternoon. Great to see you.
I'm so happy to be here.
Your concern is 100% valid, but you gotta remember when this was written, it was a different world.
The Torah says, the commandment says,
We ended up suing. So I don't know why would. Yeah, I've been accused of this before.
Enjoy, listen to the rabbi. Now I'm taking all these notes. And I'm
Oh, yeah, she did. Oh, yeah. Interesting.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Hard to tell.
So they could use somebody else.
Oh, or what?
There's some negative things.
And what's good? Oh, you didn't go.
And that fortunately is very small percentage. I don't think people so all you can do with somebody like that, if you want to very sure, is kill them, because you can't cure it. Why not? You shouldn't be afraid to say anything. I'm a very conservative person. And I won't bring it up because it's too much crap I get. But when somebody confronts me with that investor, here,
That's what I mean. I'm so wet.
you just walk up to me and say, "Would you agree with this?"
Namely,
I said, "No, I don't agree with it." You can't if you want. You give me the spirit, you know.
I didn't think he could do it.
I'm not gonna, if somebody can explain and make me change my mind.
No, that's okay, that's okay. Yeah, but, well, sometimes he does, and sometimes he doesn't. And
But I know how I feel.
at the time,
Now, in your case, what you do,
but I it's
but,
in the text
there's some things I think.
that you see personally.
But this is a law.
said to me,
It won't get solved.
that he really are conflicting.
How do you, the question still remains.
On a is saying,
It depends what you think honor means. Honor might just mean you gotta acknowledge that it is your mother. Maybe that's enough.
yeah, well,
Oh, yeah.
that would be the case for in his head. No, well, it is, it's like a lot.
Because there's a whole list of words you're supposed to have sex with. It's not in question. It tells you that's wrong.
But it's all
You
about.
gotta go to the next story to look at it. What's that?
Then I would have asked the question 3 years later.
But, you know, we've talked about it.
You know what, they have. She has known since mothers were acting like teenagers.
Oh, well, I saw that in my daughter's class.
Yeah, well, another confliction is saying, so Robert thinks, and some flip, and some you say, all right, enough. Oh, well, I asked, where is she? Said, yeah, that's what she told me. I asked you for your email. Now she said, can you tell me what it is?
Got herself involved with the kids all the time, but not as.
Oh, yeah, that would,
Something wrong with
that would, oh,
But I'm sure her mother did the same. So,
yeah.
not everybody can do all this.
Thank you.
Some people, as they get to adults, realize the situation they're in, and some just repeat it.
Why don't you text me before you call me, that way I have your number?
And if you do, so I've seen it, it's competitive, especially in New York City, but it's not offense to any economic reason.
When the weather breaks.
Oh, no.
It's an education.
But I like to go and send the parents down, we should be, you know, set up.
Well, it should be, but it isn't. That's what it's talking about.
Finally, I'm sorry for keeping you. But I wanted to underestimate.
I don't want to spend time with you here. They have 3 years. Talk about receiving.
You too, and good to see you.
What's that?
Good to see you.
So talk about receiving.
Then they want to see your bank accounts and everything else.
How does that happen?
So the issue though is that,
How?
yeah, so my wife likes to grab like her best friend. She likes to grab like.
Yes. 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 Well, huge
Well, yeah, I'll take.
Public worship,
This is, theoretically, we're talking about some rules don't apply anymore.
Yeah, that's what Ariana
Open
said.
the well for now, symbolic thinking. It's something that we
Except for the high
didn't know.
holidays, then you gotta pay.
the point is though that it's,
Forget it. 325, the early councils.
That makes perfect sense.
And that is, that there are some symbols so closely connected with the reality.
We're gonna look forward to that. Yeah,
That they open up.
I'll check my calendar,
The reality.
I'm pretty sure that's Mother's Day weekend.
Oh,
so
I
here's
think I'm
the
planning
symbol.
to be here on the
oh,
13th.
okay, great. Well, don't feel obligated.
No, sometimes I alternate because I have a yoga class I really like
Oh,
at this time.
I haven't gone since COVID.
Oh, yoga?
And I used to go over here at various places, you know. Yeah, I haven't gone in all these years. And
She just died.
and now I have a
We went
bum
over
knee
to her.
from arthritis. I have no cartilage left.
It might make you feel better, just a
I
little.
And what he was,
movement.
and he
I
told
should do it, start doing it again, but I was so afraid of the COVID stuff.
Yeah.
Everyone in their healthy.
it was old.
Go for a slow one and empty.
$2.
During the day, it's not so crowded.
That's probably
So
right.
classes, yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
Symbolically, it was worth the world to my father.
Okay, I just passed on something to bring my grandson.
So the symbol is so full of meaning. So I heard this as a child. I was upstairs with my brother.
Okay.
Crying. Because
So, do you help out with the sound?
Excuse me?
Do you help
and
out
this
with
is
the
the
sound
only thing that I
Yes.
in the morning? Okay, so on the 13th.
My brother and I, little though we were, right?
Okay, could you
We
give me a
never
brief,
thought of the money, right? We never thought, we just knew that it was so important because somehow
Okay, so
my grandmother
That's all
was.
you really have to do is just turn it
somebody
on.
else using the handle.
Yes, so,
Yeah, when they just come in,
well,
and
that's a
just turn it
symbol
on.
of you.
No, but the rabbi doesn't, the rabbi doesn't do it, somebody here does it, right?
Right. Yeah, somebody here, yeah.
Oh, the staff does it.
Just
They just come in and turn it
what
on.
the
It's
Olympians
like this, then the
Just
sound
as
on.
the
Okay,
bread
now,
and wine
that,
are
what I wanna
transformed.
do is, since it's over, I wanna turn the sound off. Here's why.
So we become the presence
Oh,
of
okay.
It
Christ
picked up.
in the world.
And I don't want.
I think that's what Leviticus says a little bit further on it.
How far away from the
You
lectern?
look for a person who
Okay,
embodies
well,
all these
that's a
values.
good question.
and you
I'm not
do
even
it
sure,
Because you just.
because, like, they use this, so
So, yes, we do, but the debate went on.
Yeah, he's
that
using
you
this
have to believe
right here.
Christ is flesh.
That's the mic.
yeah.
Do you believe that?
That's the mic.
Mhm.
Liver?
Okay, and it's coming out this way.
And people say.
I mean, it's both sides though,
Oh, it's
actually.
both sides.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
both
so
sides of it.
theoretically, if you want it to be off, you could just go.
Yeah, you would have to, push the button and pull it out.
Let me try it. So, when it's over, if I want to make sure that in other conversations afterwards, and I don't want to have to go messing with that.
It'll be better for you to just do
Yeah, but
that.
I might do that, I might do both, we'll see. But, yeah, I just want to have,
Symbolic thinking is really at the core of an awful lot of religion.
sometimes things get that way, you know, you don't wish you were, and they don't have the